Hello everyone, welcome back to the Audit and Attestation class. In this class, we'll be understanding in detail about audit engagement. So let's dive into for more detail.
So, audit engagement, very small topic. Let me increase the size for you. Is it visible to everyone? So,
yes, sir.
Audit engagement, what all things you need to consider when you are looking for an audit engagement? What is the objective of audit? Right? Objective of audit, like we discussed in our first class, is to provide opinion. In the opinion, you will be giving the reasonable assurance. In audit, we'll be issuing the reasonable assurance, right? We'll be giving an opinion based on the reasonable assurance. So in this, we'll be performing the detailed audit procedure. We'll be performing all the planning strategies, walkthroughs, test of control, test of detail, obtain sufficient and appropriate audit evidence, and basis that we'll be giving a reasonable assurance opinion. Right? Second thing we need to keep in mind is which financial reporting framework the company is choosing. So accepting or adopting a financial reporting framework is the management responsibility. So it is management who will choose whether they want to make the prepare the financial statement as per US GAAP, as per IFRS, or any special purpose framework, right? But here, as an auditor, it is being the key consideration for us to understand which gap or which reporting framework that management is using, so that you will plan your audit accordingly. You will plan your guidance accordingly. You will plan your accounting standard knowledge accordingly, right? Third thing is those charged with governance. Who are those charged with governance? Whether it's an issuer, if it is an issuer, then who is those charged with governance? We discussed in last class.
Generally, audit committee.
Audit committee, absolutely right. Absolutely right. Yes, yes. So for issuer, generally it is an audit committee. For non-issuer, it can be board of director, shareholder, or mix of board of director, shareholder, and management, right? Then next consideration is whether the company is an issuer or a non-issuer. Because if it is an issuer, then we need to follow the SEC requirement and SEC compliance, right? If it is a non-issuer, then there are limited accounting standard to be applied, limited auditing standard to be applied, right? The next thing is management responsibility, right? So management responsibility, what are the management responsibility? Two main responsibility we discussed in the morning. Can you remember what are the management responsibilities? We just design, yes.
Design and implementation of internal control.
Yes, design, implementation, and maintenance of internal control. Second is fair presentation, preparation and fair presentation of financial statement. That's a management responsibility. What are the auditor responsibility? To conduct the audit in accordance with the generally accepted accounting standard and obtain sufficient and appropriate audit evidence to provide opinion or a reasonable assurance, right? Next is AICPA or PCAOB auditing standard. So if it is an issuer, then PCAOB auditing standard would be applicable. If it is a non-issuer, then AICPA auditing standard would be applicable, right? And how to determine the nature, scope, and objective of the engagement. So here, what all things you need to keep in mind, where it's a group audit, it's a component audit, it's a joint audit, it's a statutory audit, it's a tax audit. So accordingly, you will be determining the overall scope of the engagement. So these are 8 key considerations when you are accepting any audit engagement to understand what would be the overall volume of your work. And then similarly, in continuation of that, like scope of audit, what are the considerations that affect the scope of audit? First is, again, like there are a couple of things which is similar to what we have discussed in the above. First one is financial reporting framework. So if it is a US GAAP or IFRS, accordingly you will be deciding the scope of work. Because like in some things in US GAAP is applicable but not applicable in IFRS. Some things are applicable in IFRS but not applicable in US GAAP. So accordingly, first of all, you will need to identify the reporting framework, and accordingly the scope of audit would be decide. Second is industry. Industry also matter, whether it's a technology industry, oil and gas industry, FMGC, life science, real estate, like which industry your client is. And accordingly, you will be applying the respective industry guidance when we will be performing the audit procedure, right? Third is the overall risk at the engagement level. So like we have discussed in our last week class also, we need to assess the risk at the engagement level first, right? And then at the account statement level, balance level, or transaction level, right? First of all, you will be assessing the risk at the overall engagement level, whether it's medium, low, or high. And accordingly, you will be planning the audit procedure. If the risk at the entity level is low, then probably you will be using more of analytical procedure, control strategies, walkthroughs, right, and less substantive audit procedure. But if the overall risk is high, then your substantive procedure will be increased and scope of audit will be increased. So for example, let's say there is a one company who is using SAP, let's say, in which they have maker and checker control, they have backdate entry control, they have authorization matrix control, they have segregation of duties, right? and they are proper documentation. And the other side, the company is using, let's say, Tally, or maybe company is using maybe Excel sheet to maintain their accounts, right? So in which environment will feel more comfortable to perform less substantive audit procedure or more control audit procedure, right? If you're using Tally, let's say, in that you do not have access control, right? You do not have appropriate segregation of duty, you do not have maker and checker, you do not have control on the backdate posting, right? Makes sense. So in that case of scenario, it would be very difficult for you to go with the controls reliance strategy. It will be very difficult for you to not to go into more detailed substantive audit procedure, right? So accordingly, it's based on the risk or at the entity level. If at the entity level the risk is low, then you might be performing less substantive audit procedure. But if the risk is high, then you have to end up performing more substantive procedure. So the overall risk at the entity level impact the scope of audit as well, right? Third is related party and the transaction with the related party. How much related party transaction that company has made, because generally in the related party transaction the risk is high because they are generally not on the arm's length. Next is other auditor. How many other auditors are being involved, right? Whether it's a joint audit, it's a component audit, it's a group audit, right? It's a central statutory audit. Accordingly, your scope of work will be decided. Like in the last class, we discussed about like bank audit, which is kind of joint audit, in which like 4 or 5 firms have been allotted to perform the audit of a bank jointly, in which like one firm would be doing, let's say, income side, one firm will do expenditure side, one firm will do asset side, one firm will do liability side, and one firm take care of the disclosure side. And all the 5 firms put together issue a joint audit report, right? Remember in the last class we discussed this example. Accordingly, like in which firm, in which category you follow, and your scope of work will be decided accordingly, right? Next is business development. So during the year, the company has done any merger, any new acquisition, disinvestment, or discontinuing of any operation, right? Those all things you need to keep in mind when you are deciding the scope of audit, right? Reporting currency also. So for example, you have operation in multiple country, and what is your reporting currency? Let's say your reporting currency is US dollar, then you need to take care of all the conversion factor of the respective country's operation also, right? Accordingly, your scope of work will increase. Next is statutory or regulatory requirement. For example, we'll be discussing in detail today of the single audit or tax audit. So like in government audit, or where like the entity received the grant or funds or awards from the government, right? For them, they are required to perform the single audit, compliance audit, performance audit. Those are additional audit requirements. So if you need to go through those additional audit requirement, and accordingly your scope of work will be increased. Make sense? Next is internal auditor support. So this is also again like what we have discussed in last class. If you are planning to use the Reliance strategy or not Reliance strategy. If you are planning to use the Reliance strategy, then it will reduce the scope of your audit work, right? And if you're not planning to rely on the internal audit work, then it will increase the scope of audit work, right? Next is use of service organization by the client. If the client is using service organization, that means let's say they have outsourced the payroll services, or they have outsourced, let's say, digital marketing services, right? They have outsourced, let's say, security service or office maintenance services, right? So to those service organization to whom they have outsourced, right? How is their company respective design and implementation of internal control, effectiveness of their internal control, right? For that, you will be taking SOC 1 report, SOC 2 report accordingly basis on the opinion you are providing. And this will help in identifying your scope of audit. If the company is using so many service organization, then your scope of work will reduce. If the company is not using much service organization, your scope of audit will be increase, right? Previous year result, information technology use, let's say companies using SAP, Oracle, QuickBook, accordingly your scope of work will be changed. So let's say if the company is very small and they are using QuickBook or NetSuite, then you probably are not required to involve your IT team. But if company is so big, let's say is Honda, or you can say Amazon, Facebook, they are using, let's say, SAP HANA. In that case of scenario, as an auditor, you will be involving your IT team experts, right? And accordingly your scope of work will increase. Next is expected coverage and time. So what all location you need to cover, what all plants you need to cover, what all financial statement line item need to cover. That will help in identifying the scope of audit firm. And lastly, management responsibility for design, implementation, and maintenance of sound internal control. So these are the factors you need to keep in mind when you are designing, when you are identifying the scope of your work, right? So far we have discussed two small concepts. What is first one is key consideration for an audit engagement, and second is key consideration that affect the scope of audit. Anything need more clarification here, or anyone would like to add here something based on your experience? Yeah, so far so good.